This week we're going to be taking a look at the Multiversity Pax Americana, a comic by Grant Morrison, Frank Whiteley and Nathan Fairbairn. It's a comic that thrives off of its use of form and a playful look at the various effects and techniques that can be employed in the comics medium. Similar to Watchmen, which the comic directly looks at and references, it's all about playing with particular ways of conveying information, with its rigorous structuring and thematic links. I want to focus particularly on a page near the end of the book, as this is seemingly where the crux of the book kind of all starts to come together. And before we get into it, it's probably important to bring up a couple of things that inform the work in the first place. The idea behind the Pax Americana issue of the Multiversity is very obviously Watchmen, and Grant Morrison's viewpoint of that story and probably of Alan Moore's work in general. So where Watchmen was incredibly structured, as we've looked at in a previous episode, essentially every panel has some kind of meaning, every moment, every visual ties into some overall relationship of the work. The idea seems to be that Morrison feels this left no breathing room in the story for the characters, for them to evolve and become more complex, full of life. Morrison imbues Pax Americana with the same type of formalism though, 8 panels instead of 9, and actually uses a lot of the same tricks and techniques Moore employs in Watchmen, but he wraps it up with an interesting note about life at the end of the book, which is what I want to take a look at in this episode. I'll quickly say here too, I won't cover anything even close to everything that this comic has got to offer, and will no doubt have more episodes about it in the future. Furthermore, this episode might not make a ton of sense if you haven't already read the comic, so go do that now because it is worth it. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So there's this page right at the end of Pax Americana which completely disrupts everything you've seen before. It's Harley as a middle-aged man, long hair, sitting on this bench we've seen in the page previous, and the layout of the book starts to devolve. And in that previous page, we've seen Harley sitting there in, brilliantly, a yellow jacket, looking at his father's tombstone. Obviously, his father was the original Yellow Jacket, so that symbolism is a nice touch. And the inside of the jacket's lining is red, which means that the blood red hood hangs kind of over his shoulders, which feels quite relevant that the weight of his father's death rests there, carrying it on his back. We've looked at colour symbolism before, and I think all these things start to tie in. Morrison and Fairbairn again have complete control about what colours these things will be, and the symbolism of red, particularly when this book begins with the shooting and a lot of blood red, seems to tie directly back into that death motif. And at the end of that page, what we get is Captain Atom showing Harley something, the structure of the world around them, which references back to the 8-panel grid that the book is based around, something Harley uses to play the world later on, chronologically, and Harley refers to this event at other points in the comic as his revelation. And the whole book is structured around that same 8-panel grid, again similar to how Watchmen never moves away from its 9-panel grid. Okay, so that's a bit of the preamble out of the way, so now we get to this page, and this is the page I really want to look at, and it's really a masterful use of the medium. What works here is this book, for 35 other pages, has a very defined look, because of the panel structure. It works in a similar way to you getting chapter 12 of Watchmen, and then suddenly there's that continuation of large splash pages which kind of catches you off guard, because the whole thing looks quite different than everything that came before it. And this is the same with the page here, it looks like nothing else that came before or after it. Because of that, it adds a very particular weight to the story and the narrative, and that page stands apart. Why does this page get to be so special? Well, narratively, as I mentioned, it's been referred to at many points in the story, and it's this major point of what Morrison is trying to say as well. Here, Harley's life and viewpoint starts to become understood. Again, you can see how the panel starts to shift and become unstructured, something we haven't seen before. Those middle panels at the top are different zoomed views, an odd visual flourish that doesn't occur very much in this book, and it reminds you of something from the early opening pages with the interrogation of those split pages of the faces. The panel below is wrong, in that it should probably be the other part of his body to match the rest. It all just feels a little off. This isn't how this comic should look, if the rest of the book is any comparison. But it still contains that feeling of 8, with each of these rows being divisible by 8 as we move further and further down, and that opening set being 8. Now, this reads like life. Jumbled, messy, not participating in the order you'd want it to or expect it to. It's full of mouths, moments with adults, violence, sounds, moments of things that have meaning, such as the jacket, memories. It's anything and it's everything, but importantly, it's full of life, and I think we can see that, and specifically biological human life. But it's messy, and that's clearly the point. In this story so far, there hasn't been time for messy, only for structure, and that's an obvious underlying driving force. Again, the comparison to Watchmen comes up. With Watchmen so stuck in its way, to use a phrase, it doesn't have time for this part of life, this evolution and fragmentation. What it would rather do is what we would see the bottom half of the page starting to do. Organising. It restructures. It puts things in little boxes and it's happier for it. You can see though that these new boxes are different in visuals than the jumbled ones above. In this, there's a much larger lack of humanity. There's only 1 or 2 more examples, and they aren't like the above. They're not mouths, they're not violence, they're not interesting moments, they're static and cold. Primarily, we get nature, flowers, ice, that sort of thing. We also get a glimpse at controllable things such as a circuit board, which is literally something you manufacture yourself to do a particular job, and type on a page, probably a newspaper. Again, this is press, manufactured for a specific message. And it all works out in the end. What we get is a mirror image on this page, horizontally straight through the middle. One makes much more sense, actually, to us and to Harley, and the other is a more accurate depiction of life as Morrison would see it, and that's the apparent point being made. And it's all done by organisation of imagery. When we look at the bottom half of the page, it looks ordered and structured, because Quietly has drawn those straight-lined panels, and he's ordered it neatly. The presentation of the imagery is the biggest difference between these two halves, and it goes to show the power that really has in a story. At this stage, the audience understands the visual language of Pax Americana. We've gone through 30 odd pages of it so far, and we know what it looks like, and it gives incredible power to the creators to play with that. Because if every page has a few panels like the top half of this page, the impact is lost and the page means less. And when we look at that top half again, the chaos is so perfectly created. There's panels behind panels, layers on layers, an implication that there is so much more to these images than we, as readers, are allowed to see. And again, talking powerful techniques, that's another great one, because this comic is telling us there are things we can't see. But there they are. It's not dissimilar to moments in films that pull the camera away from the event while we can still hear it, or characters discussing something we've never seen. We're aware that there is more to this world, this story, these images than we're being let in on. Which gives us imagination. Probably the most powerful tool in storytelling. We're left to wonder, or think, or assume about what those images are, what they mean. Less so, though, in the second half of the page, with its rigid formality. It's much, much, much clearer. Which leads us nicely into the thematic choice for the page. Chronologically, previous to these, Harley shot and killed his father when he was a child. Life to him stops making as much sense, it becomes harder to deal with, which is why we see that progression on the previous page of him sitting there through time and seasons, aging. He's trying to understand why. He's broken, he's human. That top half of the page accurately starts to reflect that humanity. His fractured nature, a boy that both loves his father and killed him, unable to make sense of all these memories and moments. And someone who now understands the structure of the world, and it's linked to the figure of 8. The coldness of it, the lifelessness, which helps us understand all the actions Harley takes next in his life, chronologically. This single page of Pax Americana contains a lot to extract, but from a storytelling viewpoint, it's actually very simple. It shows the effect that panel composition, panel framing choices, and order versus a more chaotic placement have on the minds of your reader, and how it can be used as a way to show the internal struggle and internal mindset of people inside the comic. It's also yet another reminder that visual language is one of the most strongest tools you've got available. In American comics, you're often working to a specific page count. If, in that page count, you can establish a look and feel for your story and allow your readers to get comfortable, it's just as easy to start breaking that look and feel, playing around with it. You're not just telling a simple narrative story in comics. You've got potential to play around with the way you tell that story. And often, playing around with the panel design can be just as important and effective as playing around with what's in the panels. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, we'd love for you to check out our Patreon and support us through there, where you can get access to articles, reading lists, and tons of page annotations. For more Twitter comics talk and analysis, you can find me on Twitter at HassanOE, and finally hit subscribe to keep up to date with all the new Strip Panel Naked videos, and we'll see you next time.